if there's one thing that I really appreciate of the most latest Obi-Wan Kenobi series on Disney Plus, is that this story about Obi-Wan that takes place between the story of the prequels and the beginning of A New Hope, that this new story gives us a little bit more insight in the starting point for the lives of Luke and Leia. After all, this takes place during the childhood of Luke and Leia. And we get some glimpses, I won't spoil exactly how, but we get some glimpses of young Luke and young Leia. And this is very revealing of the difference between these two children. A totally different background, a different upbringing that will have a major impact on their walk in life later on. And I love that Star Wars integrates this upbringing and the role that their foster parents play in the choices that they will make themselves later on, how that upbringing is integrated into the overall lore of Star Wars. Because, of course, as any good story, it's also a mirror for us. We too were brought up in very different circumstances. Each one of us has had parents, but oh my gosh, parents can be so different from one another. And in many ways, their choices, the way they looked at the universe, the way they made choices in life has impacted the choices that we make and the way that we look at the world. Sometimes in opposition, because we don't want to be like our parents, and sometimes it's very much in synchronicity. And sometimes it's this in-between where we start to realize how much we have become like our parents. But on the other hand, we're asking ourselves, but who am I? And what do I want to choose in life? How do I look at the world? Which are my values? And how much was impacted by my parents? Now, of course, I don't have to spoil anything else about Obi-Wan Kenobi to make you realize how much Luke and Leia have a different attitude in life. Because that's what we see right from the start in A New Hope. When we first encounter Luke, he is stuck on the planet of Tatooine. That's how he feels himself. He's stuck there. He can't leave. He hears these stories about adventures, about this big battle between, the Empire, and then you've got these rebels that he heard of. And he would love to join in some way, like a bigger story than what he is currently living on Tatooine, but he feels he can't. He's stuck. And you see how much his own attitude is mirroring the attitude of his foster parents, of Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. They are very, very cautious. They are very reluctant to endeavor in anything that would make you stand out. Better keep your head down. Just stay at the farm, work for another year. Forget about these crazy stories. Don't go to see your friends at Tashi Station. All that will just put crazy ideas in your head. And when Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru have this talk when Luke has left the table, it's exactly what they're afraid of, at least what Uncle Owen is afraid of. Beru acknowledges that there is a lot of Luke's real father in him, and Owen says, but that's what I'm afraid of. Later on, when Luke encounters Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they play this message of this young princess that invites Obi-Wan Kenobi to join her, to stand up again as General Kenobi, instead of this old man Ben on this remote planet, but that she needs him, that in fact Obi-Wan is her only hope. You see this difference of these three vocations there. On the one hand, you've got Leia, and she's in a horrible situation. Her ship has just been captured by Darth Vader himself. And once he knows where the rebels are, it's over. But in her despair, she doesn't seek cover, she doesn't hide, she very courageously reaches out and asks Obi-Wan Kenobi to join her, to come help her. She's not afraid. And nor is the little R2 droid, very much in a way a mirroring her own attitude. This brave little droid, he is going to make sure that this message ends up with Obi-Wan. And so Obi-Wan is the real one who's called here. You are my only hope. You have to come to me, you have to help me, you have to help my parents again. And then the third person who is then called by Obi-Wan Kenobi, so there's this like triple vocation here. Luke Skywalker hears from Obi-Wan, you have to come with me to Alderaan. And then you see Luke's reaction. It's a copy of how Uncle Owen would react. In fact, that's what Obi-Wan says. That's your uncle speaking. I cannot go. I can't even go to Tashi Station. I gotta be here at the farm. I have my obligations. I've got my duties. He's almost already like standing up and leaving, regretting that he ever went to outside the premises of the farm. It's this attitude of fear, and that fear is literally paralyzing him. Obi-Wan is kind of in between. He knows that Leia needs him. And he knows that when Leia calls him, he has to do something. But he's not leaving right away. He knows that he needs Luke at his side. But they're still stuck. So this is a good image, a good metaphor for what we see happening in the two readings of today, the first reading and then the gospel reading. The first reading tells us about a situation that takes place about 8 centuries before Christ. And the entire region where Elijah has preached is in Desiree. There is a huge crisis. There are lots of things changing in society, but there's also a revolt, like a revolution going on in the north. And some prophets are actually using violence to try to suppress these changes. And in all this turmoil, Elijah discovers that maybe his road as a prophet is in the end phase, but there needs to be another prophet. The road ahead is still going on. The people need another guide, a new prophet, to help them find their way through all this turmoil to the future. And this is where, very akin to what we see happening in this vocation, this triple vocation that you see in Star Wars, you see that God is calling Elijah, and then he asks Elijah to call Elisha. I'm just going to pronounce it like that. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation. But anyway, a much younger guy. And so Elijah, knowing himself how important it was for him to leave everything behind and to respond to the call of God, knows that now he needs to convince this younger man who still has, his life before him, to step in his footsteps and to come with him. Together, at least for a while, Elijah is going to wants to train Elisha to also be a prophet, and together they will have to go and help the people in need. And then you see this hesitance. You see this moment where Elisha is thinking, but do I really want to go? And there's this great moment, very visual, where Elijah hands him his mantle. I always kind of imagine that as like a Superman mantle. It's like, it's not just a piece of cloth, or like with Dr. Strange. The mantle is a sign of this higher calling. It's this new adventure. And so when he puts on this mantle, he literally puts on the job of being a prophet. And so you see that that's the moment that he decides to actually answer the call. Yes, he will follow Elijah. And he shows how serious that is by going back to his animals So he was working on the land. There were 12 pairs of oxen, 12 pairs, and he was conducting the 12th pair. And so if you look at the original text, it says that he actually slaughters not all the oxen, he slaughters 2, the pair that he was guiding. And he feeds the meat of these oxen that he has prepared on the fire that he made of the, whatever the, how do you call that? This, there's a technical name for that, the yoke. So he burns the yoke, he boils the meat of the oxen, and he gives that meat to his servants so that they will have something to eat when he leaves. And so he basically symbolizes in that way that his job there on the land, working with these oxen, that's over. There's no turning back. His new future is the mantle of the prophet, and together with Elijah, they leave. Not for Alderaan, but they definitely leave for new adventures. Now, this is also, so this is 8 centuries before Christ, but it is chosen today as a reading to illustrate what's happening when Jesus calls his apostles to follow him. They too get that radical calling. Come and see. Follow me. That's how Jesus has called the apostles on the beach, where they were working with their Father and fishing, and they leave everything behind. But that's not always the case. There are also a number of people that Jesus encounters along the way, and he calls them to follow him, or they themselves volunteer to follow him. But they are very much like Luke Skywalker. They are afraid to really follow. There is this will, which is already something, the willingness to follow, but then the practical consequences are too much. And so some of them want to first go back and make sure that everything's taken care of. There is this reluctance to immediately drop everything, to take on the mantle that Jesus hands them symbolically, and to truly follow. But that's not the only obstacle. There is also the obstacle of, once you've started to follow Jesus, to follow through. It's not just that first moment that matters, but it is this challenge to answer the call every single day. You can compare it to a relationship. It's not just about that first kiss or that moment that you give each other the ring and you are celebrating this wedding. If only it was as simple as that you just have to give that one commitment and then no trouble. Now, everyone knows that has been in a relationship that you have to engage this, you have to commit to this relationship every single new day of your life. It's never over. You constantly have to choose again for each other. And sometimes that's very hard, and we shy away from the consequences of that first yes that we've given each other. And one of the big temptations is if we feel like we're stuck, like Luke on Tatooine, and we hear this calling, but then we immediately think of all the things that are holding ourselves back, is that we start pointing the finger to others. They are to blame for the fact that I don't want to follow through. It's much easier to point at other people and to blame them for your lack of progress instead of pointing to yourself. We sometimes we turn ourselves into victims. But we are not truly victims. We always have this freedom of choice to change our future. But it's so much easier, much comfortable, much comforting to blame others for what is in fact what's covering up our own fear to really go. That's what Luke does. He points to his uncle. Uncle Owen, he needs me at the farm. My uncle, my aunt, I can't leave them. I can't do this. You see this also in today's gospel, where Jesus has set a goal. This is his ultimate goal is to go to Jerusalem. And he's also revealed to his apostles that this may not end well. This is not going to be a victory run. On the contrary, there is death on the horizon. And this is why you see this reluctance that is hinted at the beginning of this gospel, where before they arrive in Jerusalem, they first have to make a few stops along the way. And so they arrive in the Samaritan village. And Jesus has sent a few of his disciples to go and prepare this next stop. But they're rebuked. The people in that village don't want to help Jesus and his apostles because they know that they are going to Jerusalem. And as you know, there's a lot of tension going on between the Samaritans and the way they believe and they try to follow God, and let's say the official Jewish way to do that and following the law and the way. So there was a lot of tension between these Samaritan villages, mostly on the fringes of the country, and then you've got Jerusalem, the capital. So yeah, it's understandable that they're very reluctant to help Jesus. But then the apostles, the way they react is, should we pray that God may smite this village, that he destroys all the occupants of this town? They ask Jesus if God should take revenge on these people. Jesus must have face-palmed at that moment. Have you heard nothing of what I try to explain? This is not how the Force works. This is not how God works. But what they're actually doing is stalling. They're pointing like, we can't go on. We don't have a place to. It's like what we've been hearing them say time and again. Especially remember that time of when there are thousands of people and they're all hungry, and the apostles are like, we can't feed them. We have to send them home. They're pointing to all these external factors, and Jesus points right back at them. But it's your job. You have to do something. And here, same thing. Jesus rebukes them. And then he, in fact, it's just a detail, but then let's just go to another village. And that's not the first time, not the only time that Jesus says that. He repeats it later. If people don't receive you, just brush the dust of your sandals and just go to another village where they will receive you. So, in other words, don't let external factors determine where you go. You are responsible of the steps that you take. You should not be afraid. And you should certainly not try to cover up your fear by pointing at others. This, I think, is a vital lesson that also Luke Skywalker will have to learn. Leia has learned this in a much earlier stage in her life. Even though she used to be a young girl, very vulnerable, but she had parents that taught her that courage is a fundamental value if you want to help the people of the galaxy. And you see in the, let's say, the courage, the audacity of this little girl, you see the reflection of the attitude of her own foster parents. They've been so courageous. From Alderaan, they didn't limit the galaxy to just their little planet. No, they put their own lives in jeopardy to make sure that the galaxy resists the temptations of this empire, of these Darth lords, this emperor who's trying to overtake everyone and makes everyone miserable. And so Leia, even though she has had her moments where she was afraid, but she has had teachers in her lives, and Obi-Wan is one of them, who have taught her to not be afraid. And to dare to trust in the people around you, something that even Obi-Wan at one point has forgotten about. He too was afraid to answer the call. So he stepped back, and he was telling himself that he needed to be on Tatooine. You know, this is my job. I don't need the Force. I don't need to be a Jedi. I need to stay hidden here. And he hates it when other people are trying to call him out. You know, you need to do something. It's like, no, I don't need to do anything. But he's just afraid. And it's this little girl, Leia, that helps him to overcome his fear. And later on, Luke Skywalker will be helped by Obi-Wan Kenobi to overcome his fear, by Leia to become more and more courageous. But for Luke, the only way that he can step away from Tatooine and from the past that he clings on to out of fear is because this world is ripped away from him. His foster parents, Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru, are murdered by the Empire. That is this dramatic way in which he basically has no choice but to follow Obi-Wan. There's nothing left on Tatooine for him. And so the story of Star Wars, I think, beautifully shows how difficult it is to truly follow your vocation. If the Force calls you, that's nice. That's great if you feel it. But that's just the first step. Time and again, you'll have to obey the Force. You have to let go, like Obi-Wan tells Luke to do when he's flying his X-Wing fighter and has to somehow destroy this massive planet-sized Death Star. The only way in which you can win is by losing, is by letting go. How does this all apply to our situation? We too live in very troubled times. There is the war going on in Ukraine. There is this growing tension and division in our society. It almost feels like everything that surrounds us has turned into black and white. Everybody forces us to choose our allegiance. And if we choose one party, we have to be the enemy of the others. We have to not only say, well, these are my values, these are the people that I belong to. No, that's not enough. We feel that we're forced to take a stance and to actively destroy the other party, the others that are not like us. Isn't this similar to the temptation that the apostles experience when in the gospel? When they feel like it's not enough to walk away from this village. No, it needs to be destroyed. And Jesus rebukes them. He tells them, that is not the way. That is not. You don't point at others to tell them how wrong they are. No, it's up to you. It's your responsibility to follow your values, to follow me, to follow the vocation that you received from God. But that does not imply that you need to destroy others because they are not there yet. This, I think, is an extremely important compass for us to navigate these troubled times. It's so easy to always point at others, to cover up our own fear of everything that's changing in the world, our insecurities of what's going to happen, what's next. But this fear paralyzes us, and we should, I think, mirror or use these stories from the Bible, but also stories like Star Wars, as a mirror that shows us that there is another way. It's not the way of fear, certainly not the way of hatred and violence. The only way forward to which we are invited is to let go of our fear, to stop holding on to what gives us this false security, to not hate other people if they don't follow us, but to love them, to have compassion for one another, to continue to suffer maybe. If there's one person who has shown that following God's path may actually include losing your life, it's Jesus. And it's very similar to what we see Obi-Wan finally doing. Him obeying the Force and embracing his vocation will ultimately lead him to sacrifice his life so that Luke and Leia can continue in the future. That is the way. And it's a difficult, hard way, but it is the only way that will bring healing to our world, that will make us truly happy and fulfilled. Everything else is just stopping us in our tracks, is blocking the road that God points us. So have no fear. Don't be afraid. Jesus repeats it over and over again. And always ask yourself, What are my motives? Why am I doing what I do? Why do I lash out like that? Is it not because deep in my heart, I'm afraid for the consequences of my choice? If you feel that temptation of lashing out, if you feel that fear is overtaking your heart, there is only one thing that you should do, and that is to reach out to Jesus and ask him to take you by the hand, because he's never afraid. Amen.